My name is Cristina Ramirez, 34 years old, and I am the Safety and Compliance Director at one of the largest medical device manufacturers in the country. I have always believed in doing what is right, even when facing powerful opposition. When our VP of production dismissed my safety warnings as paranoia, I never imagined it would end with our facility padlocked by OSHA inspectors and the company bleeding $3 million every single day. But sometimes, letting someone destroy themselves is the only way to save everyone else. If you are watching this from your workplace, give this video a like and subscribe to remind yourself that standing up for what is right might be difficult, but the alternative can be catastrophic. I should start by telling you more about myself. I have spent the last 10 years building my career in safety and compliance, specializing in medical manufacturing environments. My education includes a master's in occupational health and safety from Cornell University and multiple certifications from OSHA and other regulatory bodies. I am not someone who sees danger everywhere, contrary to what my VP would later claim. I am someone who understands risk assessment and mitigation as a science, not as an inconvenience to production goals. Meditech Innovations, where I work, is one of the leading companies in medical device manufacturing. With over 2,000 employees across 3 production facilities and annual revenue exceeding $2 billion, we make critical medical equipment that saves lives in hospitals worldwide. Our flagship facility in Rochester, New York, where I am based, produces specialized cardiac monitoring equipment, ventilators, and dialysis machines. The production floor spans nearly 100,000 square feet, with 8 major assembly lines and over 500 employees working in various shifts. This story involves several key people at Meditech. First is Marshall Thompson, our Vice President of Production. Marshall is in his mid-50s, has been with the company for 15 years, and is known for his traditional top-down management style. He came from the automotive industry, where production numbers were the primary focus, and he brought that mentality with him. To Marshall, safety protocols were often viewed as obstacles to efficiency rather than necessary protections. Then there is Rachel Morgan, our CEO. Rachel is fair-minded, intelligent, and genuinely concerned about balancing productivity with employee well-being. Unlike Marshall, she understands that safety is not just about compliance but about sustainable business practices. Unfortunately, Rachel travels frequently for business development, which sometimes creates a vacuum that Marshall is all too happy to fill. Trevor Williams is the production manager who reports directly to Marshall. Trevor is loyal to a fault, emulating Marshall in both management style and priorities. He is constantly under pressure to meet aggressive production targets, and as a result often treats safety concerns as annoyances rather than legitimate issues that need addressing. Finally, there is Samantha Davis, our Human Resources Director, and one of my few allies in the executive team. Samantha understands the human cost of neglecting safety and has witnessed firsthand the aftermath of workplace accidents in her previous role at a construction company. My story begins 6 months ago when I was promoted to Safety and Compliance Director after 3 years as a safety manager within the company. My predecessor retired after a 20-year career, and I was excited to implement some of the modern risk management approaches I had been advocating for years. My first major project was developing a comprehensive risk management system that would identify, prioritize, and address potential safety issues across the facility. During my first week in the new role, I scheduled a meeting with Marshall to discuss my plans for upgrading our safety protocols. The meeting was scheduled for 30 minutes, but Marshall arrived 15 minutes late, immediately checked his watch, and informed me that he now only had 10 minutes to spare. As I tried to outline my vision for a more proactive safety culture, Marshall repeatedly checked his phone, interrupted with questions about how much downtime my proposed assessments would require, and sighed audibly when I mentioned the need for comprehensive staff training. When I finished my brief presentation, Marshall leaned back in his chair and said, "Cristina, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but let me be clear about something. This facility has operated for over a decade without any major incidents. Our production targets this quarter are the most aggressive we have ever had, and the board is watching those numbers closely. I cannot afford any unnecessary disruptions to our workflow." I tried to explain that proper safety measures actually improve productivity in the long run by preventing accidents and downtime, but Marshall cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Just make sure whatever you do stays out of the way of production. That is your primary directive. Are we clear?" As I left his office, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. It was clear that Marshall saw my role as a checkbox for regulatory compliance rather than an essential part of company operations. What I did not know then was that this was just the beginning of a conflict that would eventually shake the company to its core. Despite Marshall's dismissive attitude, I was determined to do my job properly. Over the next 3 weeks, I conducted a thorough assessment of our production facility, spending hours observing each assembly line, reviewing maintenance records, and interviewing employees at all levels. What I discovered was deeply concerning. On the ventilator assembly line, 2 critical pressure testing machines were showing inconsistent results, but operators had been instructed to run multiple tests until they got a passing result, rather than addressing the underlying calibration issue. The automated packaging system for dialysis components had a malfunctioning safety guard that occasionally failed to prevent operator access during operation. Most alarmingly, the chemical coating process for circuit boards used in our cardiac monitoring equipment lacked proper ventilation, potentially exposing workers to harmful fumes. During my 3rd day on the production floor, I met James Rodriguez, a line operator who had been with Meditech for 8 years. When I asked about any safety concerns he might have, he initially hesitated, looking around to make sure no supervisors were within earshot. "Look, there was an incident last month that never made it into the reports," James finally said, lowering his voice. "One of the coating machines leaked solvent vapor, and 2 people on my shift got dizzy and nauseous. The supervisor told them to take a break outside and then come back when they felt better. No incident report, no investigation, nothing." This information troubled me deeply. I thanked James for his honesty and assured him that I would look into it without revealing my source. That afternoon, I went through our chemical inventory and discovered that the solvents used in the coating process required specific ventilation systems according to OSHA regulations, systems that our facility had not properly implemented. Later that week, I found myself reviewing maintenance logs in the engineering office when Andrew Peterson, one of our senior mechanical engineers, approached me. He seemed nervous but determined. "I heard you are doing a safety audit," he said quietly. "There is something you should know about the main assembly line for the cardiac monitors." Andrew explained that the main hydraulic system that powered the assembly line had been showing signs of pressure inconsistency for months. He had flagged this in 3 separate maintenance reports, recommending a complete overhaul of the system. But his recommendations had been repeatedly shelved due to concerns about production downtime. "If that system fails catastrophically, it could cause serious injuries," Andrew explained. "But every time I bring it up, Trevor tells me to just keep patching it, and that we will address it during the annual shutdown in December. That is still 5 months away." I asked Andrew if he could show me the maintenance reports, and he led me to a filing cabinet where he pulled out the documents. Sure enough, there were clear recommendations for urgent maintenance that had been marked as deferred by Trevor, with Marshall's initials next to the decision. The most disturbing discovery came when I reviewed our ventilation system specifications. According to the documents, our system was supposed to maintain 15 air changes per hour in areas where volatile chemicals were used. However, when I arranged for independent testing, the actual performance was barely 8 air changes per hour, well below OSHA requirements for the chemicals we were using. After gathering all this information, I compiled a comprehensive risk register that detailed each identified hazard, its potential impact, probability of occurrence, and recommended mitigation measures. The document was 40 pages long, with detailed evidence, photographs, and citations of relevant regulations. I also prepared a presentation summarizing my findings for the executive team meeting scheduled for the following Monday. The weekend before the meeting, I spent hours refining my presentation, making sure it was clear, factual, and solution-oriented. The total cost of implementing all the recommended safety measures would be approximately $1.2 million. A significant investment, but one that would prevent potential regulatory fines, worker compensation claims, and production disruptions that would cost far more in the long run. As I finalized my presentation Sunday night, I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. I knew Marshall would resist any suggestion that required slowing or pausing production, but I believed that the evidence I had gathered was too compelling to ignore. I also hoped that other members of the executive team, particularly Rachel, would understand the seriousness of the issues I had uncovered. Little did I know, that the meeting would mark the beginning of the most challenging period of my professional career, and that the resistance I would face would be far more aggressive than I had anticipated. Monday morning arrived, and I entered the executive conference room with my laptop and printed copies of my risk register summary for each attendee. The room gradually filled with the leadership team. Trevor arrived, first barely acknowledging me as he took his seat. Samantha came next, giving me an encouraging smile. The Chief Financial Officer, Director of Quality, and several other department heads followed. Marshall was the last to enter 5 minutes after the scheduled start time, carrying a coffee and looking irritated. I noticed one significant absence: Rachel. Our CEO was not present. Marshall announced that she was in Germany negotiating a potential European distribution partnership and would be away for the next 2 weeks. My heart sank. Without Rachel's balancing presence, I knew Marshall would dominate the meeting. "Let us get started," Marshall said, not bothering to sit down. "We have a packed agenda today, so everyone needs to be concise. Christina, you have 15 minutes for your safety update." I connected my laptop to the projector and began my presentation, explaining that I had conducted a comprehensive risk assessment of our production facility and identified several critical issues that required immediate attention. As I displayed slides showing the inadequate ventilation system and its potential health impacts, I noticed Marshall checking his watch repeatedly. When I moved on to the hydraulic system issues and showed photographs of the leaking components, he began tapping his pen loudly against his coffee mug. I pressed on, explaining that addressing these issues would require an investment of approximately $1.2 million and some temporary production adjustments, but would prevent potentially catastrophic failures and regulatory violations. The most critical issues are the ventilation system and the hydraulic press, I explained, showing a slide with estimated costs and timelines. If we begin immediately, we can implement the fixes with minimal impact to our production schedule by working during off hours and weekends. Before I could continue, Marshall interrupted. "This is ridiculous. We have been operating this facility for years without any major incidents. Now suddenly, everything is a crisis." He stood up, walked to the front of the room, and glared at my risk register, which was open on the table. He picked it up, flipped through a few pages with an exaggerated expression of disbelief, and then dropped it back on the table. "This risk register is artisanal paranoia. Kill it." His voice echoed through the conference room. "This is 40 pages of hypothetical scenarios that would shut down our production for weeks and cost millions. For what? Because some engineer has a hunch that something might go wrong someday." I tried to interject. "These are not hypothetical scenarios, Marshall. We have documented evidence of." "Evidence," he scoffed. "You have maintenance requests that were appropriately prioritized based on actual business needs, not safety theater." Trevor nodded vigorously. "I have to agree with Marshall here. These issues have been managed within normal operational parameters for years. This level of concern seems excessive." I looked around the room, hoping for support from other executives, but most avoided eye contact. Only Samantha spoke up. "I think we should at least consider the potential impact on employee health and safety. If these issues are as serious as Christina suggests." Marshall cut her off. "Samantha, with all due respect, this is primarily an operations matter. We have production targets that the board has approved, and we are already behind schedule due to supply chain issues last quarter. We cannot afford weeks of downtime for problems that might never materialize." He turned to the rest of the team. "Look, I appreciate everyone's concerns about safety. Nobody wants incidents. But we have to be practical. This company does not make money by shutting down production lines to fix hypothetical problems." Then he turned to me, his tone condescending. "Christina, I understand you are new to your role and eager to make your mark, but this approach is simply not aligned with our business priorities. I want you to focus on mandatory compliance requirements, only not creating elaborate disaster scenarios." I felt my face flush with frustration and embarrassment. "Marshall, these are not disaster scenarios. The ventilation issue alone is a clear OSHA violation that could result in significant fines and mandatory shutdowns if inspected." "If inspected," Marshall repeated with emphasis. "We have passed every inspection for the past 5 years. Our relationship with the regional OSHA office is excellent. This is unnecessary alarmism." He turned to the group again. Here is what we are going to do. Christina will shelve this risk register and focus on supporting production goals while maintaining our current safety protocols. Any safety improvements that do not impact production can be implemented as resources allow. Meeting adjourned. As everyone filed out of the conference room, I remained seated staring at my risk register. Marshall had not just disagreed with my assessment, he had completely dismissed it without any substantive evaluation. Worse, he had done so in a way that undermined my credibility with the entire executive team. Samantha lingered behind and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Do not take it personally," she said quietly. "Marshall does this to anyone who challenges his authority. Document everything and wait for Rachel to return." I nodded, gathering my materials. But as I walked back to my office, I knew that simply waiting was not an option. The issues I had identified were too serious to ignore for 2 weeks, let alone indefinitely. I needed a new approach, one that would make the risks impossible to dismiss. What I did not realize then was that Marshall's dismissal of my concerns would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately cost the company far more than the $1.2 million I had requested for preventive measures. That afternoon, I stopped by Samantha's office, closing the door behind me. Her office was one of the few spaces at Meditech where I felt I could speak freely without fear of political repercussions. "I cannot believe what happened in there," I said, still shaken by Marshall's public dismissal. He did not even consider the evidence. He just shut it down completely. Samantha nodded sympathetically. "Marshall sees any challenge to his production targets as a personal attack. He has built his entire reputation at Meditech on consistently exceeding production goals, often at the expense of everything else." "But these are serious safety issues," I insisted. "If something happens, people could get hurt. The company could face massive liability and regulatory penalties." "I know," Samantha agreed. "And for what it is worth, I think Rachel would take your concerns seriously. She has always emphasized that safety cannot be compromised for production." This conversation gave me an idea. If Marshall would not listen to a 40-page risk register, perhaps he would at least acknowledge a 1-page summary highlighting the most critical and undeniable risks. And more importantly, if I documented my attempts to alert leadership about these issues, it would create a paper trail that would protect both the company and myself if something went wrong. Back in my office, I created a concise 1-page summary of the 3 most critical safety issues: the inadequate ventilation system, the failing hydraulic press, and the malfunctioning safety guards on the packaging equipment. For each issue, I clearly outlined the potential consequences: worker exposure to toxic chemicals, catastrophic equipment failure, risking serious injuries, and potential hand injuries from the packaging system. I attached this 1-page summary to an email addressed to Marshall and Trevor with Rachel copied despite knowing she was traveling. The email was professional but direct. Following our discussion in today's executive meeting, I am providing this summary of the 3 most critical safety issues requiring immediate attention. These specific concerns represent clear violations of OSHA regulations 29 CFR 1000, 910, 941910.212, 12 and 1910.147, which could result in significant regulatory penalties, worker injuries, and potential facility shutdown if not addressed promptly. I am available to discuss implementation plans that would minimize production disruption while addressing these serious compliance issues. After sending the email, I knew I needed more than just documentation. I needed irrefutable evidence that these problems were real and immediate, not theoretical. Over the next 3 days, I methodically gathered additional evidence. I used a calibrated air quality monitor to measure chemical vapor concentrations near the coating area, documenting levels that exceeded OSHA permissible exposure limits during peak production periods. I took photographs of the hydraulic system leaks, comparing them with manufacturer specifications that clearly indicated unsafe operating conditions. I even recorded video of the safety guard malfunctioning on the packaging equipment, showing how an operator's hands could potentially access dangerous moving parts during operation. On Thursday of that week, my concerns were validated in the worst possible way. Lisa Thompson, a line operator on the packaging line, caught her lab coat in the very machine I had flagged as dangerous when the safety guard failed to deploy properly. Fortunately, she managed to hit the emergency stop button quickly, resulting only in a torn coat and minor abrasions rather than the serious injury that could have occurred. When I arrived at the scene, Trevor was already there, downplaying the incident. "Just a close call, nothing to report," he was telling Lisa. "Be more careful with your clothing next time." I interjected immediately. "This is absolutely an incident that needs to be reported and investigated. The safety guard failed exactly as identified in my risk assessment." Trevor glared at me. "This was operator error, not equipment failure. There is no need to blow this out of proportion." I turned to Lisa directly. "What happened exactly?" She looked nervously between Trevor and me before answering. "The guard did not come down all the way. It has been sticking lately. We usually just give it a tap to make it close. But I forgot this time." "You have been manually forcing a safety guard to work?" I asked, stunned. Trevor interrupted. "That is enough. Lisa, go get your arm looked at by first aid. Christina, this does not concern you." "Actually, workplace safety is exactly my concern," I replied firmly. "And this incident validates the exact issue I identified in my risk assessment." Later that day, I received a scathing email from Marshall. The subject line read, "Inappropriate intervention and fear-mongering." The message accused me of exaggerating minor operational issues, interfering with production management, and creating unnecessary anxiety among line workers. It concluded with a thinly veiled threat. "Your continued focus on hypothetical risks, rather than supporting our production goals, is becoming a significant concern. We should discuss your priorities in future with Meditech." The next morning, Marshall called me into his office. Unlike our previous meetings, this one was not scheduled, and no one else was present. His administrative assistant was conspicuously absent from her desk as I entered his office. Marshall did not invite me to sit. "Christina, I'm going to be direct. Your behavior is becoming disruptive to this organization. You are creating panic on the production floor, undermining management authority and focusing on theoretical problems instead of supporting our business objectives." "These are not theoretical problems," I countered. "The incident with Lisa yesterday proves that. She could have been seriously injured." "That was a minor incident caused by operator carelessness," he dismissed. "But you used it to validate your alarmist agenda. This has to stop." His voice grew colder. "I have been with this company for 15 years. I have built this production facility into the highest performing division in the corporation. I will not have my methods questioned by someone who has been in her role for less than 2 months." Then came the ultimatum. "You have 2 choices. Either align yourself with the operational priorities of this company, or I will find someone for your role who will. Is that clear?" I maintained my composure, though my heart was racing. "I understand your position, Marshall. But my job is to ensure workplace safety and regulatory compliance. That is what I was hired to do, and that is what I intend to continue doing." He stared at me for a long moment. "You have been warned, Christina. Do not test me further." As I walked back to my office, I felt simultaneously terrified and resolved. Marshall had essentially threatened my job, but backing down would mean compromising safety standards that protected hundreds of employees. That afternoon, Brian Henderson, one of our reliability engineers, came to my office and closed the door behind him. Brian was a 20-year veteran at Meditech and widely respected for his technical expertise. "I heard about what happened in the executive meeting," he said, "and about the incident with Lisa. I want you to know that many of us in engineering support what you are doing." He handed me a flash drive. "This contains maintenance logs and performance data for the hydraulic system going back 18 months. The system has been degrading steadily, and we have been documenting it. Trevor knows about this. Marshall knows about this. They have been pushing off the repairs to avoid downtime." This additional evidence strengthened my case considerably, but it also put me in an ethical dilemma. Should I escalate this matter beyond Marshall, potentially risking my career? Should I contact OSHA directly, which might protect workers, but would certainly be seen as an act of corporate betrayal? Or should I wait for Rachel to return and hope she would take action before something serious happened? As I weighed these options, I could not have anticipated how quickly the situation would deteriorate, nor how dramatically the company would pay for Marshall's dismissal of legitimate safety concerns. After careful consideration, I decided that contacting OSHA directly would be a last resort. Despite Marshall's threats, I still believed in working within the system to address these issues. Rachel would return from Germany in 10 days, and I hoped to present my case to her then. In the meantime, I decided to build a coalition of support among other department leaders. I scheduled informal meetings with the quality director, the manufacturing engineering manager, and several production supervisors who I believed might be sympathetic to safety concerns. During these conversations, I shared my one-page summary and some of the evidence I had gathered, being careful to frame the discussion around protecting both employees and the company's interests. Many expressed private agreement with my assessment but were hesitant to challenge Marshall openly. Jonathan Rivera, the quality director, was particularly supportive. These issues affect product quality too, he noted during our meeting. Inconsistent environmental conditions in the production area can lead to component degradation and potential product failures in the field. That is a patient safety issue, as well as a worker safety issue. On Wednesday morning, a week after the executive meeting, my concerns were further validated. A small toxic gas leak occurred in the coating area when one of the chemical holding tanks developed a crack along a seam. The leak was contained quickly, and no one was seriously injured, but 2 employees reported headaches and nausea requiring brief medical attention. I immediately documented the incident, took photographs, and collected air quality readings that showed dangerous levels of solvent vapor in the immediate vicinity of the leak. When properly functioning, the ventilation system should have diluted these vapors to safe levels, but the inadequate airflow I had previously identified failed to do so. I was preparing a report on this incident when I received an email that made my blood run cold. It was from Marshall, addressed to the entire production staff and leadership team. It has come to my attention that certain members of our safety department have been conducting unauthorized inspections and making alarmist claims about our production equipment and processes. These actions are creating unnecessary concern among our workforce and disrupting our operations. Let me be absolutely clear. Our facility meets all required safety standards. Any suggestions to the contrary are uninformed and irresponsible. All safety concerns should be reported through proper channels, starting with your direct supervisor, not through unofficial channels. Production targets for this quarter remain our top priority, and I expect everyone's full cooperation in meeting these objectives. The email was a direct attack on my credibility and an attempt to shut down any safety reporting that did not go through channels Marshall controlled. It was also dangerously misleading about the actual state of our safety systems. I was still considering how to respond when Trevor appeared at my office door, looking unusually pale. "OSHA is here," he said tersely. "They are asking for you." I followed him to the facility entrance where 2 individuals were waiting. They introduced themselves as Jennifer Lawrence and Michael Roberts from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, conducting an unannounced inspection in response to a complaint. My mind raced. I had not contacted OSHA, so someone else must have filed a complaint. Given the timing, it was likely related to the chemical leak that morning. "We understand you are the Safety and Compliance Director," Jennifer said. "We would like to start with a meeting to discuss the nature of the complaint we received and then conduct a facility walkthrough." Marshall arrived moments later, his face a mask of controlled anger. "I am Marshall Thompson, Vice President of Production. May I ask what this is about?" "We received a complaint alleging several serious safety violations at this facility," Jennifer explained professionally. "We are here to investigate those allegations as required by law." Marshall shot me an accusatory glare before turning back to the inspectors with a forced smile. "Of course. We have nothing to hide. Our safety record speaks for itself." The initial meeting was tense. The inspectors explained that they had received an anonymous complaint alleging inadequate ventilation, failing equipment safeguards, and management suppression of safety concerns. They requested access to maintenance records, incident reports, and employee training documentation. Marshall attempted to control the narrative, describing our industry-leading safety protocols and dismissing the complaint as likely coming from a disgruntled employee. However, the inspectors were methodical and unswayed by his corporate rhetoric. When they requested to interview me separately, Marshall objected, insisting he should be present for all discussions. Jennifer firmly reminded him that OSHA regulations permitted them to conduct private employee interviews, and Marshall reluctantly conceded. In my private meeting with the inspectors, I was honest about the safety issues I had identified, the risk register I had created, and Marshall's response to my concerns. I provided copies of my one-page summary, relevant emails, and the evidence I had gathered. Why did you not report these issues to OSHA yourself? Michael asked. I was trying to address them internally first, I explained. I believed our CEO would take action when she returned from international travel. I was documenting everything in preparation for that conversation. Jennifer nodded. That is understandable. Can you show us these issues during our walkthrough? The inspection lasted nearly 6 hours. The inspectors methodically examined each area I had identified in my risk assessment, taking measurements, photographs, and notes. They interviewed operators, maintenance personnel, and supervisors. The evidence of safety violations was undeniable. The ventilation system was clearly inadequate for the chemicals being used, with airflow measurements far below required standards. The hydraulic press showed signs of imminent failure, with pressure inconsistencies and fluid leaks that created both mechanical hazards and slip hazards. The packaging equipment safety guards failed to function properly during demonstration. By late afternoon, Jennifer and Michael called for a closing conference with Marshall, Trevor, and me. Marshall had spent the day making frantic phone calls, presumably to the company's legal department and to Rachel in Germany. Based on our initial inspection, we have identified multiple serious violations of OSHA standards, Jennifer stated firmly. These violations present immediate dangers to employee health and safety. As a result, we are issuing an immediate shutdown order for the main production line and chemical coating operations until these hazards are properly addressed. Marshall's face went white. You cannot shut us down. Do you have any idea what that will cost? The law is clear, Mr. Thompson, Michael replied. When we identify imminent hazards, we have the authority and obligation to stop operations until those hazards are mitigated. Based on what we have seen today, continuing operations would put your employees at significant risk. This is outrageous, Marshall sputtered. We will appeal this immediately. Our legal team will. Jennifer interrupted him calmly. You have the right to contest our findings, but the shutdown order remains in effect during any appeal process. We will be placing official seals on the affected equipment. Breaking those seals before receiving OSHA clearance is a federal offense. As the inspectors left to begin the shutdown procedure, Marshall turned to me, his face contorted with rage. You did this. You contacted them, didn't you? No, I did not, I said truthfully. But whoever did probably saved someone from serious injury. You are finished here, he hissed. Do you understand me? Finished. Before I could respond, his phone rang. From his expression as he answered, I knew it was Rachel. The company was about to face a crisis unlike any it had experienced before, and the blame game had only just begun. Rachel Morgan arrived back from Germany on a red-eye flight the following morning, cutting her business trip short by 3 days. By 9 a.m., she had called an emergency meeting of the executive team and the board of directors. The atmosphere in the boardroom was tense, as people filed in whispered conversations, ceasing whenever Marshall or I entered their vicinity. The main production floor was eerily quiet, the machines silenced by OSHA's shutdown order. Official OSHA seals had been placed on key equipment, and a formal citation listing 27 distinct violations had been delivered that morning, with proposed penalties exceeding $300,000. Rachel sat at the head of the conference table, her expression grave. To her right sat the chairman of the board, and 3 other board members who had flown in overnight from various locations. The rest of the executive team filled the remaining seats, with Marshall positioned prominently and me relegated to a chair near the back of the room. Rachel opened the meeting without preamble. We are facing an unprecedented crisis. Our main production facility has been shut down by OSHA for safety violations. We are looking at substantial fines, and most importantly, our employees were being exposed to dangerous conditions. I need to understand exactly how we got here. She turned to Marshall. Marshall, as VP of Production, I would like to hear your perspective first. Marshall had clearly prepared for this moment. He stood and distributed a folder to each person present. What happened yesterday was the result of an unfortunate overreaction by OSHA inspectors, prompted by exaggerated safety concerns, he began smoothly. As you can see in the materials I have provided, our facility has maintained an excellent safety record for years, with incident rates well below industry averages. He continued, gesturing toward me without making eye contact. Unfortunately, our new safety director has taken an extremely aggressive approach, identifying theoretical issues and promoting them as imminent dangers. This created an atmosphere of anxiety that likely prompted someone to file an unwarranted complaint with OSHA. Marshall walked around the table as he spoke, his voice growing more confident. The issues identified are primarily administrative and easily remedied. The shutdown is a gross overreaction that is costing us dearly in production capacity. I have already engaged our legal team to appeal the order and expect it to be lifted within days. He paused for effect before delivering his conclusion. Had these concerns been handled through proper channels rather than being dramatized, we could have addressed them systematically without this disruption. I recommend we focus on getting the facility reopened as quickly as possible, then conduct a thorough review of our safety reporting procedures to prevent such miscommunications in the future. The room was silent when he finished. Several board members were nodding, apparently satisfied with his explanation. Rachel's expression remained neutral as she turned to me. Christina, we would like to hear your perspective now. I took a deep breath and stood moving to the front of the room with my laptop. I connected it to the projector and opened a simple PowerPoint presentation I had prepared through the night. I appreciate the opportunity to present the facts. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. 3 weeks ago, I completed a comprehensive risk assessment of our production facility and identified several serious safety issues that violated OSHA regulations. I compiled these findings into a detailed risk register and presented them at our executive meeting last Monday. I displayed the first slide showing a timeline of events. As you can see, I followed all proper channels. I presented my findings to the executive team, where they were dismissed by Marshall, as in his words, artisanal paranoia. I then created a one-page summary of the most critical issues and sent it via email to Marshall, Trevor, and Rachel, though I knew Rachel was traveling at the time. I clicked to the next slide showing photographs of the ventilation system measurements and chemical exposure readings. These measurements show air quality well below OSHA requirements for the chemicals we use. The next slides show the failing hydraulic system and malfunctioning safety guards, both of which present immediate dangers to our employees. I continued methodically through the evidence, including emails, incident reports, and maintenance records that Brian Henderson had provided. I explained the incident with Lisa Thompson and the chemical leak that had occurred just before the OSHA inspection. I did not contact OSHA, I stated clearly. I was documenting these issues to present to Rachel upon her return. However, I cannot say I am surprised that someone filed a complaint, given the seriousness of these safety violations and management's unwillingness to address them. I concluded by displaying the one-page summary I had created. This document outlines the 3 most critical issues, the specific OSHA regulations they violate, and the recommended remediation steps. Had these been addressed when first identified, we would not be in this situation today. As I returned to my seat, I noticed the shift in the room. The board members were now looking at Marshall with expressions ranging from concern to outright anger. Rachel's face remained impassive, but her eyes had hardened. She held up my one-page summary, which had been included in the briefing materials for the meeting. I received this email while in Germany but had not reviewed it in detail until my flight back. It clearly outlines exactly the issues that OSHA has now cited. Rachel turned to the CFO. Robert, what is the financial impact of this shutdown? The CFO cleared his throat. Based on our current production schedule and outstanding orders, we are losing approximately $3 million per day in revenue. Additionally, if this extends beyond 2 weeks, we risk losing our largest hospital system contract due to failure to deliver on time. Rachel nodded, then held my one-page summary up to the board. This document warned us precisely of this scenario. She looked directly at Marshall, and then in a moment, I will never forget. She started laughing. It was a short, harsh sound entirely devoid of humor. This risk register is artisanal paranoia. Kill it. She quoted Marshall's words back to him. Those words may end up costing this company over $40 million. Marshall began to protest, but the chairman of the board raised his hand, silencing him. I have heard enough. It appears we have a serious failure of leadership here. After a brief discussion, the board decided on immediate action. Marshall was suspended pending a full investigation, and I was appointed to lead the remediation effort to address the OSHA violations and get the facility reopened as quickly as possible. The next 12 days were the most intense of my career. I assembled a team of engineers, maintenance personnel, and safety specialists working around the clock to address each violation. We replaced the entire ventilation system, overhauled the hydraulic press, and installed new safety guards on all packaging equipment. We implemented new training protocols, improved hazard communication systems, and established an anonymous safety reporting process. I personally worked with OSHA inspectors Jennifer and Michael throughout the process, ensuring that each remediation met or exceeded requirements. They were thorough but fair, genuinely interested in helping us create a safer workplace, rather than simply punishing violations. The cost of the physical improvements totaled just over $1.5 million, slightly more than my original estimate, but far less than the revenue lost during the shutdown. More importantly, we transformed the safety culture of the facility, empowering employees at all levels to identify and report potential hazards without fear of reprisal. On the 12th day, OSHA conducted a follow-up inspection and approved our reopening. As the machinery hummed back to life and employees returned to their workstations, there was a tangible sense of change in the atmosphere. Operators approached me to express gratitude for the improvements, many confiding that they had been concerned about the same issues for years, but had been afraid to speak up. Trevor, who had initially been hostile, gradually became supportive as he saw how the improvements actually enhanced productivity by reducing downtime and increasing employee engagement. By the end of the remediation process, he had become an unexpected ally, acknowledging that safety and efficiency were complementary rather than competing priorities. As for Marshall, the internal investigation confirmed what the OSHA inspection had revealed: a pattern of prioritizing production targets over safety concerns, suppressing reporting, and intimidating those who raised legitimate issues. 1 week after our facility reopened, Rachel announced that Marshall would not be returning to Meditech. 3 months after the OSHA shutdown, I found myself sitting in what had once been Marshall's office. Rachel had promoted me to Vice President of Safety and Compliance, a new position that reported directly to her and had equal standing with production finance and other executive functions. My first official act in the new role was to implement a company-wide risk management system based on the model I had initially proposed. The transformation at Meditech was remarkable. The initial fear that prioritizing safety would harm productivity proved entirely unfounded. In fact, the quarter following the shutdown saw a 15% increase in production efficiency, largely because equipment now functioned properly, processes were streamlined, and employees were more engaged. Trevor, who remained as production manager, became one of my strongest allies. He later confessed that he had always felt uncomfortable with Marshall's approach, but had been afraid to challenge it. I was focusing on the wrong metrics, he admitted during a joint presentation we gave to new employees. I thought my job was to maximize output at any cost, but now I understand that sustainable production requires a foundation of safety and quality. Rachel implemented structural changes to ensure that what happened under Marshall could never happen again. Safety performance became a key metric in executive compensation, with bonuses tied not just to production numbers but also to leading indicators of safety culture, such as hazard reporting rates, near-miss investigations, and employee safety. Suggestions implemented. Perhaps most gratifying was the change in our workforce. Employees who had once been reluctant to report problems now actively participated in safety committees and improvement initiatives. James Rodriguez, the line operator, who had first told me about the unreported chemical exposure incident, was promoted to safety coordinator for his department. Lisa Thompson, who had nearly been injured by the packaging equipment, became a passionate advocate for proper guarding and machine safety. 6 months after the shutdown, Meditech received an Industry Safety Award for our innovative approach to risk management. As I accepted the award on behalf of the company, I reflected on the journey that had brought us there. It had been painful and costly, but the outcome had created a stronger, more resilient organization. The experience taught me several profound lessons that I carry with me every day. First, doing the right thing rarely follows an easy path. Standing up for safety in the face of Marshall's opposition was terrifying and could have cost me my career. But failing to stand up would have eventually cost far more, both in human terms and financial impact. Second, documentation is crucial. Had I not created that one-page summary and established a clear record of my concerns, the outcome might have been very different. That single document protected both me and ultimately the company. Third, true leadership means being willing to challenge the status quo when necessary. Rachel demonstrated this when she returned and took decisive action, even though it meant acknowledging that serious problems had developed under her watch. Finally, I learned that organizational culture flows from the top. Marshall's dismissive attitude toward safety created an environment where cutting corners was accepted and even rewarded. Rachel's prioritization of safety transformed that same organization into one where doing the right thing became the norm rather than the exception. Today, Meditech is thriving. Our products continue to save lives in hospitals worldwide, and we do so while ensuring that our own employees return home safely to their families each night. The $3 million per day that the company lost during the shutdown would have paid for my original safety improvements more than 30 times over. It was an expensive lesson, but one that fundamentally changed our corporate DNA for the better. For those of you facing similar challenges in your own workplaces, I encourage you to stand firm in your convictions. Document everything, build alliances where you can, and remember that true success comes from doing what is right, not just what is expedient or what pleases those above you. Have you ever had to stand up for what is right in your workplace against powerful opposition? What strategies helped you navigate that challenging situation? Share your experiences in the comments below, and do not forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you found it valuable. Your support helps me continue sharing these important workplace lessons, and perhaps your own story might help someone else facing a similar challenge. Thank you for listening, and remember, safety is never just a priority, it is a non-negotiable value.